Happy Thursday and welcome to Ask Ira Live. I'm EmmaKate Austin here with Ira Winderman again, back in the studio. Thanks again for coming in. Before the Heat take on the Sixers tonight, we got a lot to get to. A lot's been happening the last week. So we have just about a month before the end of the regular season.
Right.
Last game is April 11th versus Toronto, which I can't believe it's already March. It's coming really quickly. So with just about this month left of games, it seems like the roles for these players are kind of getting a little more defined finally.
Yeah,
We're figuring it out.
You would think so. You would have hoped so. But even now, Wayne Ellington, for example, is coming back, and he's been out. And this will be the first time really all season Erik Spoelstra has 12 players to choose from. It's going to get very crowded. The rotations we've already spoken about. Late game, some guys, whoa, no Hassan, no this guy, no that guy. And yet, from some guys, you're starting to get a better sense of what Erik Spoelstra wants out of them and what he expects out of them. And no player. I mean, the Dwyane Wade impact, we spoke about that. You know, usually we don't repeat topics here, but he has become such a dominant factor, such a dominant personality. I mean, off the court, the remarkable thing he did first day of school at Stoneman Douglas for those kids and saying, for all we've been through, thank you for showing up, the day he spent with them on Wednesday. And yet that comes right after Tuesday night when he goes to Washington. And all of a sudden, I got to tell you, you look at someone and you say to yourself, 36 years old, no way. The way that he has been dominating. And when you look at some of his actions and some of the things that he's gotten done this season and in these different Heat uniforms and the Vice uniforms he came back to, EmmaKate, we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. We spoke about it when Dwyane signed. Everyone expected Dwyane Wade to come in and to complement this team, to be the kind of player who was going to come in, who was going to be a role player, who was going to be a decoy. And you look at the end of the game against Washington, and you look at the overtime, and you look at that point-blank shot that he missed. And here's the thing that gets me about this comeback. When he took that shot at the end of the Washington game, you don't say to yourself, wow, it would have been great if he made that. The expectation was, why did he miss that? And that's crazy that at 36 years old, you're expecting that. So I think he has become the story. We talked last week about no alpha dogs on this team. He's the alpha dog. Yes. Dwyane Wade, if you would have asked me when he signed, traded February 8th, what's his role going to be? I was going to say, well, you figure he'll be behind Dragic. He'll probably be behind Richardson and Tyler Johnson and fit there somewhere. He's become the main man, a leading man. For better or worse, as I wrote in my story at sunsentinel.com the other day, when Erik Spoelstra talked about them somewhat as a married couple. But I find this to be remarkable, the way that he has played, what he has accomplished, and also, with only one more back-to-back set this season, it's not like he's going to have the pressure of playing on consecutive nights.
Could we have ever fathomed he would have this kind of impact on this team?
Well, and that's the thing, is it almost more of an indictment of the other players, where they would have said, hey, Dwyane, you're 36. We'll carry the load. You come along for the ride. You give us moments. Yeah. But it's been more than moments. It's been constant minutes. I think there's a reason the Heat are in 7th and 8th place in the East and not higher, because other players have sort of plateaued, have reached their limits. Josh Richardson, Tyler Johnson, even Goran Dragic, after that busy preseason with Slovenia in Eurobasket before he even reported to camp. So could we have fathomed this? No, but maybe we overstated the rest of the roster. Look, this is not anything about Dwyane. This is about the other guys. If they could lift their level and have the same Dwyane, you'd see the Heat in a much better position.
So you've said Dwyane Wade is 36 years old. Is this something he can sustain?
You know, and that's a good question. And I would have kept saying, no, and he keeps doing it.
Yeah.
Remember, the Washington game was the second night of a back-to-back set. So if you're looking at a situation where you're saying, well, he's destined to fail here, and yet that was one of his better games of the season, coming off a solid distributing performance when they didn't need him a lot against the Suns. There's only one back-to-back left this season. It's against the Hawks. It's a home game against Atlanta, a road game against Atlanta. So the other team won't be waiting with the day of rest. And in the playoffs, there are no back-to-backs. So we'll get that rest also. So, yeah, I think the expectations are that he can do it. It's just been remarkable.
So is this a good thing for this team to have, and I call him a new guy, he's not really a new guy, but to have a new guy come in and be the leader, is that good for these guys?
It's what this roster is. It's the lack of the alpha dogs that we spoke about. No, it shouldn't have been this way. James Johnson, Goran Dragic, Hassan Whiteside were the core of this team coming in. There's a reason that they named Dragic and James Johnson co-captains, and yet this is how interesting it is. Who are the three tri-captains right now? Goran Dragic, James Johnson, and Hassan Whiteside. You only get one answer to this question. Who's the leader right now?
None of them.
None of them. Dwyane Wade. That's the thing. So I think going forward, the other guys can wear the capital C in their uniforms or figuratively. Dwyane's the leader going forward. It's really weird, EmmaKate, to say this in mid-March because he wasn't even here until mid-February. The Heat might very well go as far as Dwyane Wade takes them.
Never would have thought we'd hear that this
Never thought
season.
you'd be hearing that.
It's going to be interesting to see if he keeps this up. I mean, he's become their kind of late game
go-to
go-to guy.
Go-to guy, yeah.
And like you wrote in one of your articles is, he can be as good as he once was. It's just he's going to have to scale it back
and choose in moments, unless maybe he just found the fountain of youth.
Hey, we'll take that.
I'll take that. That's for sure.
All right, another interesting situation is with Justise Winslow, because we've talked about him
a bunch of times. Sure,
times.
He's a lightning rod here.
Exactly,
yeah.
and with so many questions about, is he ever going to be anything? Is he the guy that they want him to be? And it seems like he's finally finding his role on the team. He's playing more minutes. Had, I think it was a season high in points against the Lakers with
17 points the other day, right? He's
So,
been a double-digit scorer. He has been taking over more, but I think part of that is this. As much as he's had the scoring totals, he's become more of a complementary player. Mm-hmm. He's become the player who I think he is. The question with Justise Winslow before the season, he said, I want to be an all-star. And I think every player should want that. Mm-hmm. But I think players also have to realize what they are and their special skill sets. He's a complementary player. He's played very well in the second unit off of Dwyane Wade when he's had that opportunity. He's played well off of other players. So I think the thing for Justise is, the one thing he can't do, EmmaKate, is try to do too much. I think when he tries to be that all-star, when he tries to be that dominant player, we saw this in the Washington game. He drives 1-on-2 and gets called for a charging violation. He'll go in with a wild shot. He'll try to do too much. He'll step into too many jumpers. It's tough to tell someone who has yet to turn 22. He does in 2 weeks. We'll have his birthday celebration here.
Cake
so
for
he's
everyone.
still young. Remember this. If he stayed in college, he'd be a senior at Duke right now. So really, to say what, you should never tell a player, any player, what he can't do. But I think to give up or tell a 21, 22-year-old player what he can't be yet, you have to sort of live with the troubles as you're going along. Justise Winslow, at the end of the season, I think you'd agree with this, is a far better player than Justise Winslow at the start of the season. That's all you want from players. Have you grown during the season? Justise Winslow has.
He has, and he's becoming more confident, and he's becoming a better finisher, which I guess I don't know if I predicted, but
no, and from what we've seen, the missed layups, the blown layups, he's collecting himself. A lot of times players who have explosiveness, who have the burst, and we saw that with the big dunk at the end of the game against the Suns, will always think they can do it with athleticism, with their youth and their vitality. Sometimes you slow the game down, and that's what I'm seeing now from Justise to the rim. When he breaks through the defense, when it's only him and the rim and maybe a late defender, he slows the play down so he makes the proper finish, and you're seeing him better than that right now. I didn't think we would see this kind of growth in his game that way, and I think a lot of the people who doubted Justise Winslow, and we talk about players who maybe would be out of the rotation, again, with Ellington back, with Dwyane playing so well, these are hard decisions for Erik Spoelstra.
Absolutely. And Justise has really developed an ease of offense with Dwyane Wade in that.
Yeah, and that's the thing is when we talk about lineups again, now you have Wayne Ellington back. Tyler Johnson is back. He started this second half of the Washington game. He's going to get eased back into the lineup. Which direction does Erik Spoelstra go? Does he move Justise back to the starting unit where he was, or does he keep him with that really good second unit with Dwyane Wade? Remember, when Justise broke into the NBA, Dwyane was here. He really coached him through. He worked him on an undersized post-up game. He really helped him out. There's a good chemistry there. Here's the problem. When you have 12 rotation players, you can't just have 2 5-man units. You have a couple of guys going to be standing on the outside. We're going to get to Bam Adebayo in a second, maybe Wayne Ellington, Rodney Magruder. So Erik Spoelstra has to see which players work well with which players and start working with almost 2 and 3 man units and work those units through the rest of the rotation. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, but there is one thing. So Justice's defense it's still a little bit overrated.
I think Justise came in as a defensive stopper. And I think we're seeing right now, he's not as athletic as maybe some people thought. I don't think he's as fast either. Mm-hmm. So I think defensively, Justise as perimeter stopper might be overstated. Right now, I would take Josh Richardson as the better perimeter stopper. I'm not sure in late game situations, because of his veteran versatility, I wouldn't go for James Johnson. So I think with the two of them there, I think Justise as defender If there's regression, I think that's been the regression, unless there just was too much expectation.
And let's move on to someone else who we've talked a lot about.
Really
and praised,
interesting, yeah.
And now there's some questions there with Bam Adebayo, whose minutes have taken just a hit. I mean, 3 of the last 4 games, he played 4, 5, 7 minutes, and a combined 3 points in those games.
And what coincides with that is Kelly Olynyk being back. And again, we've talked all season. The NBA is downsizing. It's a league of small ball right now. So when you have those factors and you're trying to play Whiteside, who's not happy about his minutes, and you're playing Kelly Olynyk, who missed the 6 games with a strained shoulder, he's back right now. It's interesting. Early in the season, Bam didn't play a lot, and there weren't a lot of expectations. And we even mentioned the possibility of going possibly to the G League and getting his minutes, and then he came on as a revelation. And then Hassan missed time in the 5 games early with the bone bruise, then the 9-game absence with the bone bruise. Actually, a little more than that, he missed time. Then Kelly Olynyk missed 6 games. So there never were really, for a sustained period, all 3 of them together. Yep. There are now. And we're seeing right now, it's interesting. It's almost like Erik Spoelstra is saying, this is big boy time. This is for veterans. You're the impetuous rookie who's done a nice job, but every moment matters right now. And I think that's what's happening to Bam, and it's not his time right now. And it really seems like Erik Spoelstra's player of preference late in games right now is Kelly Olynyk.
Yeah, Kelly Olynyk has become that big man, the big
finisher,
moments.
the finisher, the big in the rotation. Even the game in Washington, where Hassan did come back late in the game, he would not have if Kelly didn't have those 5 fouls. So Hassan came in, had the big block shot, Dwyane Wade saved it, the Heat got a score, forced the final second showdown against the Wizards. But I think right now, if you're to say to yourself, who's the odds-on most likely player to play crunch time minutes in the power rotation? It's Kelly Olynyk.
Yeah.
So if it's Kelly Olynyk 1, and you already have Hassan seething number 2 on the bench, I think Bam has become, and it'll be interesting, with this 12-man rotation we've spoken about, 12 healthy players, everyone on the roster now healthy but Dwyane Waders. You're going to get a couple of guys squeezed, and I think the Bam squeeze might continue.
And Erik Spoelstra hasn't really been playing these big men together as often, too, like you said.
No, and again, it just doesn't work in today's NBA where everyone else is downsizing. Here's the interesting thing. I don't think Hassan and Kelly Olynyk work necessarily long-term defensively because guarding on the perimeter is a problem. That's what Bam Adebayo does. You can play Bam and Hassan. You can play Bam and Kelly Olynyk. Bam has shown he can guard fleet, energetic, athletic players on the wing. He can do that. But if he's not in the rotation, I don't think you'll see a lot of Hassan and Kelly Olynyk. It's not a dynamic that works. And again, why did they bring in 3 big guys? Because in the draft at number 14, they felt, hey, Bam Adebayo, best player available. In free agency, when they didn't get Gordon Hayward, they felt Kelly Olynyk, best player available. Well, now they're dealing with that right now, and the fallout is fewer minutes for guys than they might have expected.
Yeah, and one of those guys, Hassan Whiteside, who was benched late against the Wizards, doesn't seem like he's thrilled with how things are going.
Hassan's saying the right things. He's been much more mature about that. But when you're at the arena and you see the body language, you can see also he wants to play more. He wants to be utilized more. That's a story that's going to carry into the offseason as well.
Absolutely. So now we're going to move into some of your questions, the Ask Ira questions that we get so many of. And you can still submit some more. Head to sunsentinel.com, ask some right now. I see them right here, and we'll answer some more towards the end of the show. So let's get started with David, who writes, Pat Riley said over the weekend the old mantra was to use 8, rotate 7, play 6, and trust 5. And I always knew who my 5 were. And I think Coach knows who his 5 are going down the stretch. Can Spo truly get it down to 5?
Well, and that's what we've been talking about with 12 players in there. For Pat Riley, it was so different. But Pat Riley, for the great rosters that he had, mostly with the Lakers, it was definitive. He had Kareem. He had Magic. He had Michael Cooper. He had his guys he knew were going to play at the end of the game. He would start a token small forward, whether sometimes AC Green played there, Kurt Rambis, he had his guys. I don't think Erik Spoelstra can get to a definitive closing 5 because I think it's going to be situational. I think he's shown that already. If he can play Dwyane and play Kelly because there's not a dominant big man, he's going to do that. If there's a dominant big man like a Drummond, he'll play Hassan Whiteside. I don't think you can say to yourself, these are the 5 guys. I know who Erik trusts. He trusts Dwyane Wade. He trusts Goran Dragic. I believe he trusts Josh Richardson. To a degree, Tyler Johnson also. So there might only be one more spot there. And he trusts Rodney McGruder. But you have to match up. You have to score. Here's the big thing, EmmaKate, that I think changes. The NBA's reduced timeouts this year. You only get 2 in the final 2 minutes per team. Remember in the old days, it used to be offensive-defense substitution. Okay, we'll put Kelly in for offense. We'll have Hassan in there for defense. You can't do that as much anymore. So it really has the coaches not only playing checkers, but really playing chess, thinking 3 and 4 moves ahead of time. Okay, if we score, do I have the right defensive team? If they score, do I have enough scorers on the court? That's where the game has changed. Pat Riley even said that. He said, look, it's a different era. I think a definitive finishing 5, I don't think you're going to have that as much anymore in the NBA.
Yeah, and this team has so much versatility that, I mean, I think that's almost a good thing for them that they can pick and choose those players who fit better in certain situations.
But you have to decide also then how you're going to finish. For example, I can give you a defensive closing unit, say, of Hassan Whiteside at center, James Johnson, Justise Winslow, Josh Richardson, and Rodney McGruder. You could have 5 excellent defenders out there. But what if you're 5 points down? Well, you're going to need offense. Yeah. You can't play your defensive team. That's why I think it's different. Conversely, then, if you are in that situation, you can roll out Goran Dragic. You can roll out Kelly Olynyk. You can roll out more offensive-minded players in that situation, and then hope on defense you can wind up getting the stop. So I think Erik Spoelstra, he almost has choices of a defensive unit and an offensive unit at the end, and I think the scoreboard's going to dictate a lot of that.
Yeah, well, and it's going to be up to Erik Spoelstra to make these decisions because he gets paid the big bucks and he can do it.
Different pay scale.
All right, Matt asks, Ira, with the way things are lined up now, if the playoffs started today, Miami would play Toronto. Even though they are the #1 seed, it certainly seems more appealing than playing the Celtics or even Cleveland. So unless the Heat can make a jump to the #4 or 5 seed, they may be better off not climbing up that ladder.
Well, and it's interesting because even since Matt submitted this question, last night Milwaukee lost, the Heat moved to 7. They'd be seeded now against Boston. It's going to be that sort of back and forth. Cleveland looks like it's going to be locked into #3. They've been up and down. So with that, you're talking about if the Heat gets to #6, which is eminently possible. We'll know more after this week against the Philadelphia and the Washington games. You know, it's interesting. We've been playing this game, all the media types, before Erik Spoelstra talks. You get the broadcasters and the writers together. And we've been asking a whole bunch of guys, list in your order of those 3 teams, Toronto, Boston, and Cleveland, who you prefer the Heat to play. My choice has been this. I'd rather play Toronto, even though it looks like they're going to win the division. It would mean finishing 8th for this reason. I think Toronto is at a point, it's all or nothing this year. Either they show that the DeRozan, Lowry, Ibaka, Valanciunas combination works, or they're going to blow the team up. That's a lot of pressure to play under. I think against that kind of team, where the other team's a little bit tight, it could help the Heat. My #2 team would be Boston. We've seen them struggling for a while. Without Gordon Hayward, Brad Stevens keeps telling us Gordon Hayward is not coming back. I think they're going to lack the offense to blow the Heat out. The Heat won that season series. All the games were early. EmmaKate against LeBron James and a healthy Kevin Love. Is LeBron James, whether he leaves Cleveland and he goes to the Lakers or he goes to the 76ers or somewhere else, is LeBron James going out in the first round of the playoffs after making the finals 7 years in a row?
No, never.
No. So I just think that's not the team you want.
No.
And LeBron, if he's going out in the playoffs, is going to make sure he's not going out against the Heat because of the history there. Even motivated by his friend Dwyane Wade on the other side, which will only get him up a little bit more. So look, I'm not advocating tanking or playing games. You have to make the playoffs first. Absolutely. You have a tough stretch for the Heat coming up. They have the Sixers, they have the Wizards, they have the Blazers, they have the Kings, they have the Lakers. We'll get to that later. They have a tough West Coast trip. Just get in. But come that last week of the season, when you're playing the Thunder and you're playing the Raptors, if you can maneuver it at all, I think you're best avoiding the Cavs. So maybe if #6 is within reach and you're sitting at 7 or 8 and a game or so behind, maybe you say, hey, Derek Jones, I think it's time you play a lot. And you too, Derek Walton Jr., that's going to be interesting. To me, the Cavaliers, for all their ups and downs this season, in the playoffs are a different animal. And for people who are going right now, but Cleveland's struggling, until Kevin Love comes back, that's not the Cavaliers we're going to see in the playoffs.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting. Again, I would never want to face LeBron James in the playoffs.
No, I'll take DeMar DeRozan, I'll take Kyrie Irving, and I'll take my chances in that.
Well, yeah, maybe we'll give those other guys a chance to play at the end if they're sitting in that spot. Okay, Danielle in Miami says, Ira, do you think the Heat will cut ties with Jordan Mickey? I could think of a few names that could replace him. Derek Jones Jr., Derrick Rose. Well,
We'll talk more on that in a second.
Terrence Jones, Brandon Jennings, Ty Lawson. We have great depth, but we could always add another player to our team.
Well, as you know, it's constantly changing. Derrick Rose today agreed to terms with the Timberwolves. He's reunited with Tom Thibodeau up there.
Chicago Bulls Part 2. Yeah.
You know, it's like Jimmy Butler there. Now they got him there. So they're sort of bringing the whole gang together. So he's out. Here's the greater question. They have a $5.5 million exception from Dwyane Wade's season-ending ankle surgery. That has to be utilized by next week or it goes into the wind. But it's interesting because some of the names, a lot of the names you mentioned there to me are wing players. We just spoke about how many wings the Heat have already, how they can't play everyone, how Rodney McGruder now is coming back and Wayne Ellington is coming back. So to me, it's a chemistry thing. They're even saying this right now in Minnesota. How are we going to play Derrick Rose? We don't know if we have time for him. I think the Heat are going to be very judicious before they make a move. Yes, you are correct. And the writer's correct. Jordan Mickey has not been playing. He's been inactive. He'll probably be in a suit again now with all these healthy Heat players. But when you bring in a player, are you better bringing in some guy who is expecting to play or having someone like a Derrick Jones Jr. or Derrick Walton Jr. on their two-way contracts just glad to see there? Because you're going to see a lot of former Heat rotation players all of a sudden in sports coats of games because they can only dress those 13.
So do the Heat really need more, or is it kind of too late in the game for that? I mean, we have, what, a month left of the season?
I mean, you can always use more. And there's always a chance you're going to have injuries, so that becomes an issue also. You can always use depth of talent. But if a player plays a different style than this unique style the Heat are playing right now, then I think you say to yourself, is it worth changing things up for his skill set? Here's what's interesting. Players who played in China this season, the Chinese Basketball Association, when their season ends, they're eligible to come back to the NBA. So you have someone like a Ty Lawson, point guard, we've been talking about, the Heat could use an extra player. That's one possibility. You have other players, Jimmer Fredette out there. Well, we know he can score. If the Heat's getting into another offensive funk, you can do that. So I think it's still possible, but EmmaKate, rather than rush it for next week's deadline with the $5.5 million exception they have for Dwyane Wade, I think the Heat will say closer to the end of the season, hey, for the minimum, who do we have? Who's healthy? Who's not?
Yeah, I agree. All right, so again, please submit some more of your questions to us. We want to keep chatting. But before we do that, we're going to do like we've done every week and take a look back at some of the best or maybe worst moments.
Or most interesting.
There we go. Most interesting moments of the 30 seasons of the Miami Heat. So, Ira, what is your top 10 list for us?
Today I'm going to go, because we're in the middle of it, with Heat best playoff race moments. Because one thing now, it is on. We know there's a good chance the Heat will clinch. We know with these games against Philly and Washington, it could be number 8, could be number 7, could be number 6. It's going to be interesting. And even with Detroit fading and Charlotte fading right now, you're still looking at a situation the Heat's not going to clinch before April. The games will matter. So I said, you know what? Let's look back in history at some of the interesting clinching times, the late season playoff runs as we look at our 30 at 30. This photo gallery is already online at sunsentinel.com. So you're not seeing it first, but you're seeing it pretty close to first. So let's start our names right now with the most memorable Heat playoff races. Start at number 10, go backwards. You have the return of Alonzo Mourning. Remember, he came back from the Olympics in Australia in 2000. All of a sudden, he turns to Tim Hardaway on the flight coming back and saying, something doesn't feel right. And he says, push my thigh. And Tim Hardaway touches it, and its skin doesn't expand back and leaves a dimple. And he realizes something's wrong. They see a nephrologist. They realize he has kidney disease. The Heat announces he'll be out the entire season. Zoe, however, because he's Zoe, comes back at the end of that season, makes it for the playoff run. Didn't go that well. We'll get into that in a second. Number 2, Tim Hardaway. And this was interesting. The Heat not only clinched their playoff berth late in the season in 1999, that also is when Tim Hardaway became the Heat's all-time leader in assists. So it not only was a clinching moment, it was putting Tim Hardaway in that list, and obviously a place in Heat lineage. 2000, this was interesting. The Heat are about to clinch the playoffs. They're in good shape against the Orlando Magic. The introductions happen, and the power goes out. And for the next 2 hours, on the night the Heat are hoping to clinch a playoff berth, instead we're literally sitting there in the dark until they start the game. So yes, they clinch later that season, not schedule-wise, but later in the day. So sort of an interesting moment there when it comes to clinching for the playoffs.
Absolutely. Let's go back to that Alonzo Mourning.
Sure.
So he came back for the playoffs, but it really kind of messed up the team's chemistry, and they
that's
were
cold.
swept.
That's cold. And I know that's what people say. They never should have played him. They shouldn't have brought him back. Look, Alonzo Mourning fought his way back. And his doctor said, with the right regimen, we can get him back on the court. This is an all-star player. This is a defensive player of the year. But the Heat had such a unique chemistry that season with Brian Grant and Anthony Mason and the surprise season they had. But the Heat felt, look, if Zoe is there, we're going to play him. So they played him. And they wound up losing in the playoffs that year to Charlotte. They were never the same. The team had to completely rebuild from that point. But again, EmmaKate, I mean, it's really interesting. Like when you say to yourself, do you go with chemistry or do you go with a franchise leader? I think that was one of the all-time toughest decisions in Pat Riley's coaching and front office career to say, yes, we're going to risk this chemistry. And I think when he looks back on it, even now, he realizes he had something special, but he also had a very special player.
Yeah, but then they didn't make the playoffs until 3 years later under Dwyane Wade, which is, I think, something we'll get to maybe later in the list.
Yeah, so we'll go there. So let's continue down our list right here. We're going back to 2009. This is a really interesting story because this is a case where the Heat, they clinched the playoffs when they beat the Charlotte Bobcats on April 3rd, 2009. They became the second team in NBA history to have won 15 or fewer games the previous season and make it back to the playoffs. This was Erik Spoelstra's first year as head coach. In 1994, at the home finale, and this is interesting, when the Heat clinched their second playoff berth, this time they did it by actually winning a game. When we talk about our top of our list here, the first playoff berth, the Heat got in through sort of the back door. So Erik Spoelstra, when the Heat ends this game and they finally make the playoffs, he goes, the Heat win, and the Heat win their way in. So I think that was pretty meaningful. And then you get to the first Heat banner and just what it meant to finally win a division title. When they clinched the playoffs on April 10th, 1997, they had a victory over the Pistons. This was really interesting. For the Heat to win that banner, they had to win that night and the Knicks had to lose. And on the big screen at the arena, this was back at Miami Arena, fans got to stay to watch the Knicks lose and the Heat win. So it was sort of a double celebration night. So when you talk about playoff moments, to get that first divisional banner, to win on your home court, and then to watch the stinking Knicks lose, really good night.
Yeah, I'll say. So jumping back to 2009, so the year before that, the Heat went 15-67 in Erik Spoelstra's first season as head coach, and then they came back the next year and made the playoffs.
Yeah, and again, 2008 was just awful. and that's the year they won 15 games and everyone was injured, and that honestly was probably the real time the Heat tanked in their history. And then Erik Spoelstra comes in for Pat Riley, and everyone, number one, who is Erik Spoelstra? He steps in, he turns his team around, Mario Chalmers is drafted, they bring in Michael Beasley, uneven rookie season, but what they needed, they get to the playoffs against Atlanta, they force a Game 7, Jermaine O'Neal is playing for them that year, and you could see what Dwyane Wade needs also. So Dwyane Wade goes through that season, and the next season the Heat go out in the first round, and then Dwyane Wade says, I ain't going out like this anymore. No more first rounds. The Big Three comes in starting in 2010. So this year, with Erik Spoelstra, 2008-2009, it really set the groundwork, not only for 2 first-round ousters the next 2 years, but then 4 great Big Three years also.
Oh, yeah.
So we move on down our list right now, getting to the climactic finale. And if we look at our list right here, 2013, this is when the Heat had the Big Three, and they were so dynamic. They clinched a playoff berth. Think about this. On March 8th of that year. That would be saying right now the Heat are in the playoffs. Yeah. Now, Toronto, for example, clinched the playoff berth yesterday. This is what the great teams do. They take care of work early. We go next to Pat Riley's initial push. Remember, when Pat Riley came in 1995-96, at one point the Heat were 18-23. And everyone's going, you shouldn't have left the Knicks. You had it good there. You're not going to be in the playoffs. Then we talked about our Heat great trades in one of our lists we did. They get Tim Hardaway, they push forward, and they take care of it. And then in 2004, this was a remarkable season. Stan Van Gundy takes over as coach. The Heat start 0-7. They're 25-36 in early March, and everyone's going, no way, this team's now making the playoffs. Here's what's interesting, EmmaKate. Even to this date, with Detroit struggling, Stan Van Gundy says, I tell my players, because of what happened in 2004, anything is possible. That was a remarkable and remarkably fun year.
Absolutely. So the Heat won 14 of their last 17 games for the regular season and made it into the playoffs behind some guy, you may have heard of him.
Dwyane Wade just came into his own that season. And it's interesting because even during the playoffs, Pat Riley would go about Dwyane Wade, you're riding him too much, you're using him too much, and yet you could see at that moment, you ride Dwyane as long as you can ride him. You let him take care of it. And what Dwyane did in that season, the way he came together, such interesting names. Lamar Odom with that team, Brian Grant with that team. And what's interesting about that team is they went to the second round of the playoffs, lost to the Indiana Pacers. But Pat Riley knew more was needed. And remember when we did our trade show and we did our list, we talk about it. They ripped that team apart. They brought in Jason Williams. They brought in Antoine Walker. They brought in Shaquille O'Neal eventually. And they got that team to another level. So this was the team that gave South Florida a taste. Getting to the second round. Great victory over New Orleans. Dwyane Wade's iconic winning shot in that Game 7. And then they moved on, and that was another start to sort of the lineage of the big three, of Shaquille O'Neal, of the first championship in 2006. And like Stan Van Gundy, he was at the arena the other day, just on Saturday night, and he says, that's not a year you'll ever forget. Stan Van Gundy has one picture of his entire NBA coaching career in his office, and it's Dwyane Wade hitting the winning shot against the Hornets that year. That's how special a year it was.
And it's amazing to think about. That was 14 years ago. And who's the leading man again for the Heat?
Yeah, and what goes around comes around. And if you notice, a lot of people on the internet, including my son, posted side by side Dwyane's winning shot the other day and Dwyane's winning shot against New Orleans. Exact same shot, exact same look. And even Dwyane actually favorited that tweet. He just says, wow, it really does look the same. Really, what goes around for the Heat this year has come around.
Absolutely. All right, let's take it to number 1. And I think you might have spoiled it earlier. And I apologize. I dug and searched. Didn't really get you the photos you were looking for.
And that's fine yet. Were you born then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was.
Okay. All right. So it's like, I'm just kind of the older guy in the show, so I thought I'd bring that up. The Heat have a chance to make the playoffs in 1992. This is their first playoff berth. They go to Boston. All they have to do is win. They don't win. So they have to rely then on an Atlanta Hawks game later. Well, Kevin Lockery does this Sunday sports show. He showed up with the late Jim Mandich, and I believe it was Joe Zagacki at the time.
Oh, we did find one.
I see. All right. So I'll talk quick because Kevin Lockery talked quick. So Kevin Lockery is in the studio waiting for the result of this game that he needs for the Hawks to lose. He literally is looking at the monitor of the feed of the game. That's how the Heat, on the final day of the season when they lost, clinched their first playoff berth, by watching it on TV. We captured Kevin Lockery live. It was a big moment in South Florida. It didn't matter about the record of the team or anything else. It mattered that they finally got in. And just to see someone whose entire playoffs are hanging in the balance, just staring at this monitor right here, am I going? Am I not going? What's going to happen? And that game against Atlanta wasn't decided until the final ticks of the game. Whether the Heat were done for the season, the next day Pat Riley would have done his season-ender press conference, or whether they get ready for the playoffs. Not such a good playoffs against Michael Jordan and the Bulls, but at least get in there. But it was, you talk about great live TV. That really was a moment. The great Jim Mandich was there. It was his television show. It really was a fun time. And I'm glad you found a picture of Kevin.
I know. We got one. It was a struggle, but we did it. Ira, thanks so much again for that. I always enjoy getting to talk about the Heat history. And we'll see, maybe this year we'll get a good playoff run. That's yet to be determined.
I think they'll be there. I don't think they'll have to watch for a result on TV, and I think they will clinch before the final week of the season. Thanks to Detroit, thanks to Charlotte.
All right. So now let's take some time to look ahead at the upcoming schedule. We don't have a ton of games left, but we do have an intriguing road trip. What do we got?
Well, I mean, I'm looking ahead to next week's West Coast trip. It's very unusual for the Heat to play on the West Coast this late in the season. This year, because the circus stopped, and the Heat didn't have to leave in January for their annual circus trip. Their West Coast trip comes up next week. They have a Monday game against Portland. They have a Wednesday game against Sacramento and a Friday game against the Lakers. Emma, you might have looked early in the season and said, well, it's a West Coast trip. The travel's tough, but not the games. Portland is as hot as any team in the NBA right now. Damian Lillard is making a late charge to at least get on the ballot as one of the final 5 guys for MVP. He's played that well. Then you go to the second game of the trip after this game against Portland, Sacramento. So you can say to yourself, well, it's just the Kings, they're tanking. Remember the last time the Heat played the Kings?
They lost.
The Kings came in, weren't even trying to win, and the Heat played very poorly, lost that game. And the last game on the trip, again, non-playoff team, the Lakers. Well, last week, Lakers come in here. They destroy the Heat with their fast-paced offense. So that's going to be a tough week. I think 1 and 2 would be acceptable. get the game in Sacramento. If the Heat come back at 2-1, then those playoff dates we talked about clinching, I think will get moved up. But that's going to be a real test for the Heat. Their last extended road trip of the season, nothing more than a couple of 2-game trips after that. They're going to have Oklahoma City and Indiana. They're going to have Atlanta and New York. But it's going to be really interesting to see what happens on the West Coast there. And maybe we'll see the character of this team also. Will they go to Sacramento? Will they go against the Lakers and say, we want to avenge those losses, we look bad? I think we'll get a real window into the character of the team as well.
Yeah, they could really make a statement with some wins there. So hopefully that's what happens. All right, let's take some time to answer a few more of your Ask Ira questions before we say goodbye for this week. Ken asks, are the Heat a lock to make the playoffs with Detroit so far back in the number 9 spot?
I'm not going to say a lock for this reason. We spoke about the upcoming schedule. Philadelphia is tough. They're playing pretty well. Washington, well, we know they beat the Heat earlier in the week. The West Coast trip we talk about, yes, I'm saying 1-2 is good enough. 0-3 could be possible. You still have 2 games left against the Oklahoma City Thunder. You're playing them there. They come to American Airlines Arena the second to last game. And EmmaKate, the Heat's last 2 games of the season are home against Oklahoma City. Well, you know the Wild West standings. They will be playing for something. Then the last game is against Toronto. There's a chance they'll be battling Boston for the number 1 seed going down to the final day of the season. So is clinching a lock? No, there's enough tough games. I think in a week or so, after Philly, Washington, Portland, Sacramento, and Lakers, we'll have a better sense. Yeah, Detroit's making it a lot easier. That tough overtime loss to DeMar DeRozan and to the Raptors on Wednesday night helped the Heat, but I'm not counting anything because, EmmaKate, there's been 2 or 3 times this season where you and I both said the Heat look good, they're going for 3rd place, and then they're in 8th place, and then they're in 9th place. So I wouldn't count my chickens, but I think they're in a pretty good shape right now.
Exactly. All right. The CM says they're stashing Derek Jones Jr. for big plans next year when they'll need a bunch of minimum contract talented guys.
And this is interesting. Derek Jones Jr. is on his 2-way contract. He has 4 days left. Here's an interesting little twist I don't think people know. Your 2-way NBA day limit ends at the end of the G League season. That ends on March 24th. So after March 24th, the Heat can call up Derek Jones Jr. and Derek Walton Jr. no matter how much NBA time they have left on their 2-way contracts. So they can legitimately spend another 2 weeks with the team. Again, to me, Derek Jones Jr., fascinating prospect. You know, the way that he jumps, his leaping ability, his athleticism. But if the Heat don't make a move in the offseason, and I hate to keep going through this list again of all the wings, but with Goran Dragic and Josh Richardson and Tyler Johnson and Rodney Magruder and Wayne Ellington, they have so much in the backcourt, they're going to have to thin something out. I like Derek Jones Jr. I don't like him better than any of those other players. To me, the optimal outcome for the Heat this offseason is a bunch of 2-for-1 trades. Thin it out. Give a team that's looking for quantity, bring in quality. Then the young players like Derek Jones Jr. and Derek Walton Jr., it'll be easier to carry those players on your regular roster instead of 2-way contracts.
All right, Sam asks, is it possible that Dwyane Wade will be in the starting lineup again? Dwyane has proven to everyone that he deserves to be in the starting lineup.
You know, it's a matter of if he's only going to play X amount of minutes and they want to keep him in the 20s and he's played above that EmmaKate to a point right now, why burn those early game minutes, the feeling out period when the score is 7-7, 8-8, 13-13, and you don't need his dynamic play? It makes more sense. If you're asking me how do I want to budget Dwyane Wade's minutes, I want him in the 4th quarter. I want him at closing time. I want him, he probably can't even play 8 minutes in a row, so maybe the final 6 minutes. It doesn't make sense to start him. You don't need your best players in that situation. What you need to start the game is don't get us in trouble. Now, the starting lineup has been shaky a little bit lately, and I think Erik Spoelstra will address that again. But I think 36-year-old Dwyane Wade is much better off the bench in the most meaningful minutes instead of the vanity of being a starter.
Exactly. Makes a lot of sense. All right, one more question for today. Kyle says, I missed the 4th seed Heat.
Yeah, you know what? Remember, it was 2 months ago, late January, early February, the Heat went into Cleveland. If they win that game, they pass the Cavaliers. This is the roller coaster of the NBA season. This is the roller coaster of NBA injuries. Kelly Olynyk and Wayne Ellington for the Heat, Tyler Johnson. It's the up and downs. The Heat do have a favorable schedule going forward. They play a bunch of tankaholics going forward. 2 games against Atlanta, a game against Chicago, a game against New York, a game against Sacramento. So they can get that win total up. I would project the Heat right now could finish anywhere, I think they will make the playoffs, of course, from 5 to 8. But to get to 5, they're going to need help. I think they're going to wind up battling Milwaukee. They have the tiebreaker. Season series over. They're up 2-1. I think if you're betting on final playoff spots for the Heat, I would go for number 7 or number 8 for a couple of reasons. One, I think that's how it's going to play out. Philadelphia, after Miami, when they play them on Wednesday, does not have a road game against another losing team the rest of the year. They have a soft schedule. They can get to number 4 easily. If Washington defeats the Heat on Saturday, they're going to have a 3-1 season tiebreaker. I think there's going to become a point where Eric Spoelstra pull the plug, but I think he steps back and goes, you know what? Like we talked about playoff matchups. I'll take my chances with Toronto. I'll take my chances with Boston instead of Cleveland. I think 7 or 8 are more likely. It was fun that day in Cleveland. I remember I did our show on Skype that day when all the Heat had to do was win and beat LeBron, and they came close. Last second James Johnson shot, missed, and they would have had a chance for 3. All they had to do this season is make the playoffs, and they will meet that mandate.
All right, I'm going to hold you to that. We'll see in a couple of weeks. It's been a really fun season. It's going to be fun to see how it all shakes out. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
2 weeks.